Hey, Unified Dumbass here. Today I'm going to be talking about how the dimensions unfold from this one-dimensional mechanical string. Let's begin with the 1D string. From the top looking down of my coil analogy, you can see that this looks like a one-dimensional string. This is the fundamental flow from unspooling future to the winding past, from left to right. It is pure direction. Time is what moves this string from left to right. When this one-dimensional line encounters resistance or interaction, it does not stay straight. It warps. This warping is the second dimension. It creates width from a one-dimensional string to a 2D sheet. The first dimension is still there, but it sits at the edge of this now two-dimensional sheet. Now when the second dimension encounters resistance or an interaction, it will warp, creating depth. This is the third dimension. You and everything that is 3D is simply warped 2D. If the first dimension sits at the edge of the second dimension, then the second dimension sits at the edge of the third dimension. Everything, including our universe, is this one-dimensional mechanical string. Imagine the amount of warping needed for the first dimension to create the second dimension, which is big enough to create our 3D reality. That is a very big string. First dimension has to stack up on top of itself to create the plane, the second dimension. The second dimension has to stack up on top of itself to create the 3D world. Imagine how many stacks and stacks and stacks of this one-dimensional string exist in order for our reality to exist. Time moves each dimension into the next dimension. What happens when our 3D space plus 1 time warps? In the extreme case, we get a black hole. The warping is so fucking strong that the third dimension now begins to stack up on top of itself. A tube of toothpaste is a great analogy for this. It is the pressure, all of this compressed material bursting out of the cap, that creates a one-dimensional stream. The warping of the first dimension creates the second dimension. The warping of the second dimension creates the third dimension. The warping of the third dimension creates the first dimension. This is cyclical. You only need one object, this mechanical string. You only need 3 dimensions plus 1 of time to explain everything. So what happened before the Big Bang? Well, it could have been just the compressed volume of 3D. The first dimension sits at the edge of the second dimension. The second dimension sits at the edge of the third dimension. The third dimension sits at the edge of the first dimension. If we had two universes, two one-dimensional strings, what sits in between them is a whole lot of warping and stacking. But what pulls all of that taut and back into a straight line, the first dimension, is time. We are the volume of 2D stacked up on top of itself, which emerges a 3D-esque type reality. But if you want to experience pure 3D, I would suggest falling into a black hole. You would get compressed. This is the purest form of the third dimension. You will get squished. Space-time will stack on top of you. You will die, okay?